Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this session of Arohana. This is a session where we will be talking with Shiva Devireddy, the founder, CEO of GoCoop. And it'll be, in my estimation, and all those who are familiar with this area, a most invaluable and insightful conversation when we hear what he has to say about his experiences and his journey with GoCoop. As always, before we start, there's a bit of housekeeping work that we need to sort out. And so a few housekeeping tips as always. All participants will be muted, and please post all your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. And keep your questions as precise as possible. And also do send in mail to us with any questions or doubts that you might have at arohana@nice.org.in. And we will also request your feedback after the completion of this session. And you can visit us at nice.org.in. You can follow us live on Facebook at facebook.com/niceorg.in. And I would again encourage all of you to please come visit us on our LinkedIn page when the URL is given out there. You can also join the LinkedIn group. You can search for us at Network of Indian Cultural Enterprises. And all the recordings of all the sessions will be available on our YouTube channel. Again, you can search for the NICE sessions on YouTube. So today, without any further ado, we have Shiva Devireddy, founder, CEO of GoCoop. And he's certainly been somebody who's, I suppose, been a real veteran of this space. So we will talk to him and learn more about how he sees the space, how he's built this, what are some of his learnings and insights that I'm sure will be extremely valuable and useful to all of us who are out here trying to build a business. I will now welcome Shiva. So good afternoon, Shiva. Welcome to Arohana.
A very good afternoon, Sanjay, and very good afternoon to everyone, all the participants of this panel discussion.
Wonderful, great. So Shiva, I'm sure you've been asked this question like 100 times. From the IT industry, after spending time there, how and why did you jump into starting something like GoCoop? Help us get that background, first a bit about yourself and how you, were a typical, let's say, IT industry guy, and then you started this. Just help us, go through that journey.
Sure, Sanjay. So I think I started my career in the Bay Area, Sanjay. This was back in 2000. After graduating from Arizona State, I took up a job in a Hewlett Packard startup in the Bay Area. This was in 2000, and I think these were very exciting times. This was the internet .com rush, and typically if you're driving in a public transportation or going through public transportation in the Bay Area, and if you could spell out Java properly, you would get an offer by the end of the ride.
That's right. So trespassers would be recruited.
Exactly. So these are crazy times, but yeah, we were building a very interesting supply chain product for the semiconductor industry back then. This was kind of a marketplace for semiconductor manufacturers and OEMs, which were buying this fab, mostly from Southeast Asia. And we're trying to connect the fab manufacturers and the buyers from rest of the world. Was with this company for 3 years and then moved on to Accenture. Was with Accenture in various technology consulting and leadership roles. My last role with Accenture was Director of Innovation with their centers in Bangalore, the Innovation Center for SAP in Bangalore. Also was responsible for setting up centers in Germany for SAP innovation. So after almost 10, 12 years of corporate career, Sanjay, I always had this in back of my mind, the technology that we are using to help the Fortune 500 companies or Fortune 1000 companies be more successful? Why can't we use technology to really make the Indian producers, or how can we not use this for connecting potentially farmers and artisans of our country? This was a broad idea. I mean, the idea was very simple. Can we use technology to drive social change? That was my theme, and that continues to be my theme even today. And I started thinking about it. I started looking at, what could be the potential use cases of technology. And that's when I, started understanding both about agriculture also, and also about craft sector a little bit more deeply. And what I found was quite startling, that, India has one of the largest number of weavers and artisans. In fact, I think the largest number which exists in the world for handmade craft artisans are from India. And at the same time, I think the products that we were producing were also really in demand across the world. So especially during my consulting experience, both in US and Europe, I mean, you could find these Indian craft products being sold on high street, boutiques or stores at a really high premium. So the demand for these products was very strong, but the challenge seemed to be that, the artisans who were making these products were not able to really, were barely able to sustain. So looking deeper into the problem, what I found out was there were millions of artisans, hundreds or maybe over 1,000 craft clusters across India. But the biggest problem seems to be, connecting them with market. The market system was extremely long. The value chain was extremely long with too many intermediaries, and it was riddled with a complex supply chain, where finally the producers, the creators of these products, were hardly getting anything out of the product. So this seemed to be the problem, and that's where I thought, that why can't we connect them with technology, right? Why can't we use technology to build a platform where we could bring together these small communities of artisans across the country into an online platform, almost
And
like
which
a
year was this, Shiva?
This was back in 2010.
2010.
Yeah, 2010 is when I started thinking about it seriously, and 2011 is when I decided to take this up full time. So the idea was very simple, Sanjay. Like, how can we connect these, groups of artisans across the country, the clusters across the country, into an online platform, federate into a community, and connect them with consumers and buyers, not only in India but outside India. So that was the concept, and it's we started our journey end of 2011, early 2012. And I must say, Sanjay, that you just said that I'm not at all a veteran in this space. I mean, there are people who have spent like 5 decades in craft sector, so I think we still think we are on day one, right? I mean, GoCorp still thinks we are on day one. So 10 years in this sector or 9 years in this sector is, you're still scratching the surface.
But 10 years as a technology.
Yeah, 10 years as a technology company is a lot of time, but yeah, in craft sector, I think things, move at a different time scale. So yeah, I think we are still on day one, Sanjay.
Right. And so in the past 10 years, right, just can you give a sense of the number of clusters or the number of artisans, weavers, etc., that you kind of work with today?
Yeah, so it's been 9 years, Sanjay. So exactly 9 years, October 2020, we completed 9 years. And so we have traveled across the country. Let me tell you that the whole journey has been very interesting. We started off with Karnataka, then with Andhra, Telangana. I mean, at that time it was a joint state. Now it's Andhra and Telangana, and then Orissa. Now we are working with artisan groups across 22 states in India. And it was a fairly, slow process to begin with. Initially, we had to travel cluster to cluster. So 45 clusters we had traveled within the first 24 months. So almost we were traveling to 2 clusters every month. And we used to conduct workshops or sessions educating people about what is online commerce. And if you can just imagine in 2012, when 3G was not there and smartphones were not so prominent, right? I mean, even I used to have a very simple, I think it was probably a 3.5 inch or 4 inch small device. And internet connectivity used to be very nascent, right, in India, even in cities. So at that time, talking to someone in an artisan or a weaver in craft clusters, where people have never seen a computer before, and trying to convince them about online commerce and why e-commerce could be big and why it could be important for them, was quite a challenging task. So it was quite slow. The process was very slow till 2014. And from 2014 onwards, we started seeing a strong uptake. There was a lot of focus on digital. I think it was slightly more easier to convince people to join us starting 2014. And 2016 onwards, it has been, I would say, fairly, e-commerce was fairly well understood, I think, by a lot of groups that we work with. In fact, today, during the COVID times, last 8 months, there's been unprecedented rush towards e-commerce, right? So almost all the groups that we talk to, they're very keen to come online. They want to work with GoCoop. So last 8 months, though it's been a unprecedented crisis for all of us, for especially the artisans, the e-commerce rush, I think, or the realization that e-commerce could be a very good channel for them, I think, really set in very strongly during these last 7-8 months.
Right, right. So let's say from 2011 through till about 2014 was kind of the awareness generation and all of that phase.
Right.
2014 to maybe 2016, there was a fair bit of trial that was taking place.
Yeah.
And 2016 onwards, the process of engaging with your platform happened. Would that be a fair way to think of it?
Absolutely, Sanjay. Yeah.
Yeah. And therefore, and you travel to 22 states, you said you're working with at 45, God knows how many clusters, how many weavers, artisans, and all of that.
We are working right now with 72 clusters across 22 states, Sanjay. And we work with 350 cooperatives and groups right now across these 22 states.
72 clusters, 350 cooperatives, 22 states, right?
Correct.
So if you were to look at all of this, and clearly clusters of the same, cooperatives of the same kind, but in different states, or different clusters in different states, what are some of the key differences and key commonalities?
Yeah, so I think maybe we should take one more step back, Sanjay. So basically, the base for craft is a cluster. So
right.
Cluster is nothing but a group of villages, usually, right? But it
Right.
can be as large as a district as well.
Right.
So there are some clusters which are just a village. There are some clusters which are a group of villages, and there are some clusters which are as big as a district. So a cluster is a place where a certain craft is practiced.
Right.
For example, Pochampalli is a cluster, which is again a group of villages. Pochampalli is a village in itself, but the cluster itself involves villages around Pochampalli as well. And this is a cluster which practices the tie and dye craft.
Right.
So similarly, there is a Bargad cluster in Orissa, which is quite a big cluster. Again, it has multiple smaller clusters within it. Bargad is also a district. And I think they practice again Sambalpuri Ikat. I mean, this is a craft which is practiced in that cluster. So Government of India has recognized clusters across states, across districts in the country. And they've also classified them as small, medium, large, and also mega clusters. There are more than 10 mega clusters, I think, identified by Government of India. So each cluster consists of weavers and artisans practicing a certain craft. Now, these weavers and artisans are organizing themselves either as a cooperative or they are working under a master craftsman or a master weaver. Usually, these are the two prominent forms of enterprises that we see in the sector. So either a cooperative, which is a collective. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with cooperatives, but cooperatives are a form of business, right? So you have a company you have a non-profit NGO, or what you also call an NGO, and then you have cooperatives. So cooperative is something in between a non-profit and a for-profit company. So it's kind of in between. And cooperatives are
SHGs also?
SFGs are not formal. Yeah, they follow the same principles, Sanjay, but they are not formally registered.
Right.
Yeah, whereas cooperative is a registered legal entity.
Correct. And
Yeah.
responsible to the state, not to the central government. Or it could
Yes,
have
I
both.
think, yeah, cooperatives are mostly governed by the State Act. Cooperative Act is a state
Is a state
subject.
subject.
Yeah, is a state subject. And there is a governance on cooperatives. Mostly cooperatives are governed by the state, cooperative department.
That's right.
But basic principle of cooperative is that, they are self-managed. So, they're member driven. So they elect their own leadership. In principle, it's supposed to work. All the profits of the cooperative is supposed to be divided amongst its members. So if there are 100 weavers, they're coming together to form a cooperative and they do a certain business and there is a certain profit in that business. Those profits are supposed to be divided amongst its members. So, and these 100 weavers are supposed to govern themselves. So they can elect their secretary, they can elect their president every 3 years or every 5 years. The cooperative can elect their own governing body to manage themselves. So yeah, the artisans either are organizing themselves as a cooperative or under micro entrepreneurs, master weavers or master artisans. There are also NGOs in the cluster. So there are quite a few prominent NGOs which are very active in clusters. So NGOs are again mostly non-profits, right? So so either a trust or a Section 25 kind of organizations.
Right.
So this is how the supply chain generally looks like, Sanjay, at a cluster level. And over a period of time, cooperatives have diminished in size and scale, also in numbers. We see a lot of micro entrepreneurship in the clusters right now. So you'll find what we call as master artisans, master weavers, and now I think the next generation, a lot of younger weaver and artisans are interested in becoming micro entrepreneurs themselves.
And when you say micro entrepreneurs, you mean it's a single person um, supplying to a single set of buyers, or a single person, let's say, on your platform?
No, I mean, basically, usually a person by himself cannot produce a lot, Sanjay. So you'll have to aggregate some production.
Right.
So master weavers can be slightly larger in size and scale because, for example, a master weaver who has been in business for, let's say, 20, 30 years, they are still very well organized. I would call them as maybe, slightly more, maybe a small enterprise, right? Not exactly a micro entrepreneur. Whereas a micro entrepreneur is someone who's just starting off, right? Maybe with 5 artisans or 5 weavers or 10 weavers. So it's much more smaller size as compared to a master weaver. And these are like really starting off. So they're fairly new to business.
Got it. Got it. So what will, so, coming, so that was very helpful, I think, sort of helping us understand the clusters and the master craftsperson and the micro entrepreneur and all of that. And since you traveled so much across the country and met so many of these clusters and cooperatives, what are some of the commonalities as well as what are the differences you think that, let's say, if somebody wants to be in the business tomorrow, what should they keep in mind?
So I think, yeah, there are different kinds of businesses, Sanjay. So for example, I see a lot of craft entrepreneurs now. I mean, focusing on a certain craft. Like, there are entrepreneurs who are just focusing on, let's say, Chanderi, or there are entrepreneurs who are just focusing on Khadi as a product. So I think building a strong supply chain is essential for any business, Sanjay. I mean, that goes without saying. But in craft sector, this is easier. It's much more complex to build a strong supply chain, and there are various challenges that we have faced. For example, when you're dealing with international clients, there are stringent timelines. There are very stringent quality requirements. So meeting those timelines and meeting those quality requirements is quite challenging in craft sector because this is fairly inorganized, right? So, let's say if you're talking about 10,000 meters fabric of ikat, now those kind of orders are not very common, but there are brands which need that kind of fabric. They need 10,000, and some brands also need larger orders, 50,000, 1 lakh meters of fabric. Now this fabric is can be produced in cluster, and each time the dyeing is done, it's done. It's a VAT dye, so it's done locally in the village mostly, and the color shade could be slightly different from every lot.
Right.
And every weaver who's weaving this fabric could be doing it with a different at a different rate. I mean, could be using different beating differs from weaver to weaver. So the construction of the fabric also will keep on changing a bit. So these variations in fabric are quite inherent in handloom, but a lot of buyers don't understand this, right? So buyers want a fairly consistent fabric which looks exactly the same. We don't want too much variation in color. So building a good supply chain is extremely important. So identifying, what your product is, how you want to produce it, what kind of quality parameters you're looking at. Based on that, it's important to build a good base. Could be a cooperative, could be a couple of master weavers, which could become part of your supply chain. But designing that supply chain and building it very carefully is going to be the most critical part.
Right. And clearly, there was a comment made by someone, the other day that expecting consistency, particularly, when, like you said, given the supply chain, having differences in the product itself could well be a feature and not a bug, meaning it's handcrafted. So therefore, one batch could be unique because it's made by a particular weaver.
Right.
The next time the same weaver makes another batch, it could very well be slightly different, either from a color standpoint or the weave itself and all that. It will not be 100% the same.
Yeah, absolutely, Sanjay. I think that is true. And I think that's the inherent nature of craft, handcraft. But at the same time, I think, I feel also that sometimes this is also being used quite as an excuse, right? For a lack of consistency, right? To a large extent. For example, I have seen cases where, the design is completely off, right? And the fabric has too many issues. So finally, when you have to make a garment out of a fabric, or you have to sell a product with a large retailer, so there has to be certain consistency, Sanjay. So we have to also keep in mind the requirements of the buyer. The craft definitely has inherent characteristics, but we also have to be cognizant of what the buyer is also expecting. There is a certain amount of education, and we can expect the buyers to understand this. But I've also seen that it's very difficult to get even reasonable quality and consistency sometimes, unless we really build a strong supply chain.
Got it. So how did you go about it? Because there's, like you said, there's awareness, there's a training element. Somebody has to be there and make sure that the processes are followed. It also is dependent on the raw material that comes in on time, and meeting deadlines on one side. And on the other side, you have to start developing trust with the potential buyers, or at least
Right.
assure them that what they're going to get is of the required quality and consistency. And particularly also ensuring that the delivery schedules, etc., are maintained, right? So
Yeah.
it's like a two-way trust and training and process management challenge, which is a non-trivial.
Yeah.
So how did you go about it from, let's say, first from the buyer standpoint?
Yeah. So marketplaces are always challenging, Sanjay, because you are having to deal with both sides, right? I mean, complexities on both sides. You have to build trust with the sellers first, and then you also have to build trust with the buyers. So we focused initially a lot on the sellers, to be honest, Sanjay. So as you rightly said, till 2014, I think there was a lot of focus on the seller, understanding the product, the consistency, what we can really offer to the buyers. And also, I think, I mean, we do deal with a lot of silk, right? For example, there was a 1.4 lakh Baluchari sari that we sold to a customer in Canada recently, right? This was made by a artisan in West Bengal, a weaver in West Bengal. So I think these are very expensive products as well. So quality is extremely important, and specifications also become very important, right? So when somebody is buying a product like that expensive, they also want to understand what kind of silk has been used. What is for example, um, the kind of dyes which are used in the particular product, right? So, I mean, the specifications become extremely important, and it took us some time to get this right with the artisans that we work with. Once we understood the product fairly well and the capabilities of the artisans, then we started pitching to buyers. And very pleasantly, we started seeing, inquiries coming in from buyers in an organic manner. Because once we started putting this information out there, and people were searching for example, Warangal Daris, right? And Ikkat bedspreads. We started getting some very interesting inquiries from our buyers. This was back in 2014. And our first customer is a UK based retailer, and who's still one of our best customers after, yeah, 6 years. So he reached out to us saying that he liked this products, and he wanted to do a few samples and see the quality. After we were able to successfully do that, the buyer has been consistently ordering from us. There were quite a few challenges in multiple orders with this buyer. Shipments were delayed because monsoons are always a problem, right? I mean, we always expect monsoons. Sometimes we think monsoon is not going to be bad this time, or we expect monsoons to come in June, but we suddenly realize the monsoons are actually in August and September. So I think it's been difficult to sometimes manage delivery schedules, but the buyer has been very understanding. So we could build that trust with the buyer that it's not because of things which are completely in our control. Some of these things are not in our control, and hence the delay. Some of these buyers were very understanding, and we could build that trust and build that relationship with buyers as well over a period of time.
Right. And on the supply side, what were some of the challenges? You talked about, having to do this education and all of it. But once you started your platform, how easy or how hard was it to get them to start believing in the platform itself, saying, hey, this is what you can do? Because somebody has to go there, convince them, photographs have to be taken, uploaded, then make sure that what is delivered matches the photograph and the catalog, right? All of those things. Just help us understand how that process was.
Yeah, so the marketplace itself was launched in 2014, Sanjay. So we were predominantly B2B, Sanjay, till 2016. But the marketplace process was still very similar. So we used to go to a cluster, conduct a workshop, educate people about our platform, about online business, what are the requirements of online business, and then we would catalog their products. And this would involve photography, writing specifications, capturing the price, and also sometimes there is a price range, right? Because depending on some products had a range based on the yarn to be used, or the dyes to be used. There was a range in which the prices were given. So once we collected all this information, then we would come back and we would process this information, and typically it would take us 3 to 4 weeks to go live with a particular seller on the platform. So initially the expectations were low, because we would set expectations saying that we are still in initial stages, right? So don't expect suddenly orders to come, because on our side the demand was not sorted. We were still figuring out the supply first. So the first few years, we set very low expectations with our sellers and told them, this is a long journey, and at least the expectations within the first few months should not be much, but gradually I think there will be demand. So some of the groups that we worked with were very patient with us. In fact, The first group, again, we started working with was APCO in Andhra Pradesh, the cooperative APCO in Andhra Pradesh. It was one of our largest seller over a long period of time. The second cooperative we started working with was Boinka. And we have done over 3 crores of business for Boinka in the last 6 years. So they were very patient in the beginning, but gradually, as demand started building up, we could set some reasonable expectations, saying that, what, we could give you 25,000 business in the first 1 month, or we could give you 50,000 business in the first 1 month. So slowly, I think, as demand started scaling, we were able to set some expectations. So the key here, Sanjay, is to set the right expectations. Sometimes the problem is artisans have been taken for a ride for a long time, right? So people come and say, you do this sample, I'll get you a 10,000 meter order, right? And a lot of people believe that and do that sample, but orders never come. And even with GoCop, this has happened so many times. So many buyers will come to us and give us samples, ask us to produce samples, which is actually quite complex and quite time consuming. After doing all the hard work, then finally, when we are expecting an order, something else changes, the project or program gets canceled, and we finally don't get the order.
And I'm guessing that these samples are not paid for, right?
Sometimes they're paid for, Sanjay, and mostly now, after some experience and some learnings, we charge sampling quite, yeah, because I think it's difficult to do business otherwise, right? Yeah. So yeah, I think so. That trust is very important, and we have to set some reasonable expectations to begin with. But at the same time, you need to strongly focus on giving them business, Sanjay, because if you're not able to give business, then all the effort that they're putting on their side, they are giving you the information, they're helping you with the product shoot, they're keeping the inventory aside for some time. So all that effort from the artisan group or cooperative would go waste if you're not able to give them business.
Absolutely. And I think it is your ability to find buyers that drives the back end as well, right? Because they see sales happening, and that gives them greater motivation to
give you more products. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And to get good buyers, you need good products and good sellers.
So it's a virtuous cycle.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why marketplaces, two-sided marketplaces are quite challenging, Sanjay. I mean, you have to control at least one side very strongly.
Right.
Otherwise, it's challenging.
And in your case, which side did you control? Was it more on the supply side or the
yeah,
demand?
We controlled more the supply, Sanjay. So we were like, we never, in fact, there's a Google video on GoCoop, which is also on our homepage. 70% of our traffic used to be organic. So customers used to discover us, right? We never used to, we never had budgets also to do too much of marketing. But since we were able to bring a very good collection of products, very good sellers on our platform, we were able to see good inquiries. And in fact, we started getting demand mostly through organic channels.
Understood. Now, help me understand another thing. You've got the supply chain running, you've got buyers buying, etc. But what happens when there is a problem? Let's say there is some defective products, or for some reason the buyer is not happy, or some order is canceled. How does the system work then?
Yeah, that's a good question, Sanjay. This is where I think, we have to be very sensitive to the producers, in this case, the artisans, that they are not having they're not in a position to take this kind of liability, right? So the specifications have to be very clear, and it has to be also followed very carefully by the artisan. So if the artisan makes a mistake, sometimes knowingly, unknowingly, also we have to see how best we can manage that situation. I'll give you an example. We were running a large program for a pretty big international brand, and there was an extra web. It's an extra web design, and instead of 4-ply, the weaver used 2-ply, but the count was it was 4-ply 20s. I think the count was same, but instead of 4-ply, I think the yarn used was 2-ply. So the fabric, I mean, cannot really make a big difference when you're looking at the fabric, but that entire production was rejected by the buyer. It was somehow missed through the communication. I think there was also some lapse from our side, so we couldn't really catch this during production. So that entire fabric was in our warehouse, and the buyer was not willing to pick it up. But we had a commitment to keep. So there was it was partially the mistake of the weaver who has woven the fabric, because in the specifications it was very clearly mentioned 4-ply. But we paid the weaver as agreed. So the payment is done on time. In fact, we don't start any program without advance. Mostly all programs, bulk production programs, start with an advance. And once production is done, we make the remaining payment. So the weaver was paid, but we had to look at other ways of liquidating this particular fabric that we had. The buyer was not willing to take this. So there are situations like this, and you have to really factor that into your overall plan. You can't deny payments to the artisan, at least in cases like this. And at the same time, you can't expect your buyers to pick up, when there are small issues like this.
Products that they had not specifically asked for. One last question to you, Shiva, before I will open it up to the questions that are coming in from the participants. What has been your experience with, let's say, insurance or with benefit subsidies programs launched by multiple state governments or the central government over the last 11 years? The past 9 years, let's say, that you've been around. What has been your experience? Because let's say in a case like this, let's say the rains come, right? So there's an insurance program perhaps you can have, or, you access some government grants, subsidies, benefits, and so on. Just help us very quickly understand what that is all about.
Yeah, so government has various schemes, both central government and also state government, Sanjay, I think. So the effectiveness of these programs is, I would say it varies, right, from program to program. But a couple of programs which I think are quite good is, one is, I think, the insurance program, right, for artisans. There is a life insurance cover, and there is also a program on sponsoring the education for children of artisans. There is yarn subsidy. Basically, there is through NHDC, I think yarn is supplied to weavers across India, and there is a small subsidy, I think 10% subsidy on yarn for weavers, which is being used for years now. So there are quite a few programs which are, I think, have been beneficial for artisans. But I think, and state governments have their own programs. Like, for example, in Telangana, there are specific programs which are working on top of what is being given by the central government. And during COVID times also, there has been different programs by different states directly giving benefit to the weavers. So there's been a certain amount of direct financial benefit given to weavers during this last 7-8 months in different states. So I think, so the effectiveness of these programs have been varying. But what I feel is really missing is the focus on market linkage. So rather than giving, a grant to a weaver, right? I think what is really missing right now is, how do you really encourage him to sell his own products? How do you encourage him to really earn his own income, right? Rather than giving him some kind of a financial, stipend or something like that, right? So those kind of market linkage based schemes or assistance has been limited. Also, working capital has been a challenge, Sanjay. So I think, though there were some schemes in the past, I think in the 11th 5-year plan, there was something called as RRR scheme, which again looked at revitalizing the cooperative sector in handlooms. And I think a lot of loans were waived off. But I think some of those things, one-time initiatives are, I don't know whether they are good or bad, but usually they just evaporate without really creating an impact, according to me. What is more important is consistently, providing working capital to artisans. How can every artisan have a small working capital, could be 50,000 or could be 1 lakh, in which he can, consistently borrow, repay, again borrow. He can have some kind of a working a credit limit through which he can run his business.
So that's the most important in your view, that is access to credit.
Access to credit, and and really subsidizing market linkage, right? I mean, really facilitating market linkage. These are the two areas which I feel, I think a lot more can be done.
And market linkage would mean platforms like GoCoop, is that right?
Not only that, Sanjay, I think there was something called as a marketing incentive. I think this was again there till 13 or 2012 or 13.
Right.
So weavers were getting an incentive for selling their product. So basically the customer also gets benefit and the weaver also gets benefit. Because handloom is a little, slightly more pricey, right, as compared to other mill-made products because of the process involved. The marketing incentive was a very good thing where you could subsidize the marketing cost, and there was more benefit in selling the product to the customer. So the customer and the weaver both were getting benefited through this incentive.
Right. So, I will now pick up questions that are coming in from the participants.
Sure, Sanjay.
The questions that's coming in, Shiva, is that how do you get the weavers or artisans essentially to work using technology, right? I mean, what kind of phones, what kind of training, what kind of any other device that they had to use? And second related question is on your supply chain on the back end, etc. I mean, how the way you went about organizing all of them with regard to process, technology, design, following SLAs, quality, all of that. Is there any sort of case study or some material that someone can access? First, the technology part, then this.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, we started off primarily with a online platform. So it was a web platform that we started with. And this is the platform that we were using for onboarding the sellers, onboarding the products onto the platform. But very soon we realized that at the craft cluster level, right? I think you need a lot of educational material to really help people understand what the platform is, how it works, and it has to be in local language. So we started creating videos, vernacular, videos which could explain the platform and how it works. So these are more like training guides for artisans to understand the platform. This again helped us in the short term, but what we then realized is finally the platform also has to be vernacular to a certain extent. So we then launched a mobile-based platform which was supporting 5 languages. So this again helped us quite a bit in onboarding sellers and also sellers using the platform consistently. Because if the platform itself is in Kannada or in Telugu or in Oriya, then it was much more easier for the artisans to use the platform. So this is how we built an online platform initially, but then we also launched a mobile platform which was multilingual.
Right.
The entire backend, right, is a fairly complex system, which is what we call as our ERP. We have also developed our own ERP over a period of time, which is really tailored for the craft sector. So for example, the kind of attributes you have for a particular product, the process that we follow all the way from sourcing yarn to making the product, finally the weaving, and then finally the finishing the product and shipping the product to our customers. So the entire process is mapped in our backend ERP system, which is also pretty much custom built by our team.
Got it. Okay.
So this is a technology backbone. Yeah.
Right. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. And the second question was more about, Sanjay, what's the framework or case studies?
If somebody wants to have a quick read saying, okay, this is what, Shiva and GoCoop did to manage the supply chain or to build the platform or whatever.
Right. So there is a very good Harvard business case study on GoCoop. It's available online, and I think it's available. I can also share a link on the group maybe later. But yeah, there is a fairly detailed case study written by So Professor Rama from the Central European Business School and Professor Shabari from IIM Bangalore. This is a very good case study which covers the workings of GoCoop, what have been our challenges, how we went about, solving those challenges. So
That'll
this
be
could be
very
an
helpful.
interesting read. Yeah, this could be an interesting read for
So if
all
you
of
can
us.
share that with us, we will share it with all the participants.
I will do that.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Another question is, when you find the buyers, right? How did you go about finding quality buyers? Number one. Number two, how do you ensure that buyers don't start interacting with the sellers directly and cutting out GoCoop?
Yeah, so this is a big challenge actually, and I don't come from a marketing and sales background, so this was even more challenging for us because um, I think, as I said earlier, right? I think the good part was initially we were blessed to have a lot of customer inquiries and demand coming in an organic manner. So we got our first 10 customers without really doing any significant marketing push from our side. So that was a good part. But gradually, for us to reach out to more buyers and also consumers, it was fairly challenging. So in the B2B space, we made a list of prospective customers, brands, retailers, um, and fair trade organizations which were working with handlooms and handicraft. So we had made a pretty extensive list of over 200 organizations, and then we started approaching them. The response was okay, but the sales cycles were very long. I mean, I must say it was frustrating, right? So to really go through the process with some of the buyers, and that's where we realized that it's important to really find the right buyer. Otherwise, you're going to spend endless amount of time just in the sales process, and even after that, you may not have a very successful relationship with the buyer who may not understand handlooms very well. So we started really qualifying buyers very, very carefully. So buyers who understand handlooms, buyers who have a good experience with
How did you find these guys, the buyers?
Yeah, Gaurav, I mean, some of these buyers are not, so for example, retailers who are dealing with handloom products, right? So it's not so difficult to find out people who are selling handwoven products or handcrafted products, let's say in Australia. So we
Got
were
it.
able to quickly do a little bit of market research and identify who are the top five, top 10 players, right? And who are dealing with Indian handlooms or handcrafts in a certain country.
Right.
And we were continuing to get a lot of inquiries also, Sanjay. So many times it was inbound for us. So we used to get almost 100 inquiries a month. And within those 100 inquiries itself, we had to qualify very carefully which inquiries are we going to spend time on.
Right. The serious ones, huh?
Yeah, the serious ones. So that is where I think we started becoming more sharper in our focus, saying that, we're not going to spend time on every inquiry, but we'll be looking at inquiries where we think there is potential and there is good understanding of Indian craft. I think those are the ones that we really focused on.
Right.
With respect to consumers, Sanjay, I mean, we have 57,000 consumers right now, and from over 15 countries. Our repeat customer rate is 53%, which is quite high for
Very
this, which is for this sector. And our order returns or cancellations are less than 3%,
Wow.
which is also quite low for e-commerce. The reason again is that we focused on customers who understand handlooms, right? Customers who understood craft. So we were not really selling a sari, but we were selling craft.
Got it.
We were not selling an apparel, but we were selling something handcrafted. So the customer uh, targeting was very sharp in our case. And though we number of customers are still low, 57,000 is not a very large number, but I think it was a good strategy because otherwise we would not have so much repeat and we would have significant returns, and the returns itself would have killed us.
Got it.
So if you had returns of 30% or 25%, like what general retailers have,
Yep.
online retailers have, it would have been extremely difficult for us to sustain.
Got it. Got it. And of course, while 57,000 are your end consumers, your bigger sale must be happening to all the buyers, right? I mean, the B2B buyers.
No, I think right now we are B2C is our dominant business.
Dominant, is it? Okay.
Yeah, I think we are almost 80% B2C, Sanjay,
Excellent.
20% B2B right now.
Right. Got it. One other question that's come in is, how do you sell through exhibitions? And typically, which exhibitions would you decide to participate in? How do you decide to take which weavers to which exhibition? And an approximate sense of the economics of that. If you put in, let's say, $100, what
Right.
would be the expectation on the return?
Yeah, so exhibitions have worked out very well for us. And we conduct exhibitions, right? So we generally don't participate in exhibitions as such. I mean, so we are organizers of, so we look at exhibition as our offline marketplace.
Right.
We have an online marketplace and exhibition becomes our offline marketplace.
Right.
And we've been very successful at doing exhibitions over the last 4 years now. So 2017 is when we started our exhibitions, and yeah, it's been 4 years. And we decide on exhibitions based on the season. For example, Ugadi is a big season both in Karnataka and in Andhra. So just before Ugadi, we plan to do exhibitions either in Bangalore or in Hyderabad, and we are also now exploring tier 2 cities. So, so Mysore, Shimoga, Mangalore, Hubli. So these are the cities that we are looking at. So yeah, it's based on season. That's how we decide location and the timing of the exhibition. And the participants of the exhibition also is based on a certain geography. So we have certain market intelligence. Like for example, if you're doing something before Varamahalakshmi in Bangalore, you would probably be looking at a lot of silks and traditional silks, right? So for example, Kanchi, you would look at Karnataka silks. You would also look at silk saris in general from South India, like Venkatagiri, could be Pochampalli. So you have to have that market intelligence in terms of what customers are looking for in a particular location. And
Right.
based on that, you have to curate the sellers. There's
Right.
no point in having like 10 Banarasi sellers in a place where customers are not so fond of Banarasis.
Of course. Another question on the sort of supply chain end. Clearly, while the clusters, etc., are making the products, what's the mechanism for transporting, or the logistics of it? I mean, are there warehouses involved where you store them, and then there's a certain minimum period or maximum period that you need to keep them there before they're shipped out? How does that work? And where do you find these warehouses, and how do you make sure that they are suitable for the products on hand?
Yeah. So Sanjay, I think just to add also on the previous question, I think there was something about economics of exhibitions.
Yeah.
I just want to say that exhibitions have been quite profitable for us in the sense that every exhibition we were able to break even. And I think online is much more difficult to break even, right? Some of you understand this. The online economics are much more challenging as compared to offline. But at the same time, exhibitions are a lot of work, right? I mean, organizing it, setting up the infrastructure, moving from one city to another. And also you have to deal with a lot of natural, obstacles like, Bombay, we were once stuck with in very bad monsoons. In fact, yeah, I think there could be political buns and things like that. A lot of scenarios could play out in an offline case. Online is that way much more seamless and much more predictable, but the unit economics have been much more attractive with offline exhibitions for us.
So, last two questions. One is, of course, regarding this warehouses.
Yes.
And I'll also ask the last question because I think we have another speaker after this. We don't want to keep her waiting as well. Is how do you handle payments? Payment gateways and all that. Just help us very quickly understand that.
Yes. So we used to have 4 regional offices. Now we are having 3, and all our regional offices also double up as a small warehouse. So the way it works is all orders, maximum we try to ship it from the seller directly to the customer. So for example, if the seller is a Sambalpuri Bastralaya, which is a cooperative in Bargarh, and the customer is in Portland, Oregon, I think there's no point in getting the product to us. We directly ship it from the seller to the customer wherever possible. In some cases, we have to consolidate the orders because let's say if the order is placed across multiple sellers, then we consolidate the orders into a warehouse and then we ship it from our Bangalore warehouse to the customer anywhere else in India or outside India. All yeah, so basically 3 offices also which double up as warehouses right now, and that's how we operate. The payments, I think we work with multiple payment gateways. So we use Razorway, we also use PayPal, we used to use HDFC, we also used to use CC Venue. We use multiple payment gateways for processing the payments. And usually the payments are captured in something called as a nodal account, in which the payment is kept, basically the money is kept there. And once the seller processes the order, the money is transferred into the seller account. So this is typically like kind of works like an escrow, right? So the money is kept in the account, and once the seller processes the order, then the money is then processed into the seller's account.
And what's the typical cycle for this? How many days?
Generally, it's 2+1. I mean, within 3 days, I think the money should reach the seller.
Got it. Got it.
And this is the fastest in the industry, Sanjay. I mean, even the big players, the majors, the e-commerce majors generally take 21 days.
Yeah, that's it. Because for them, it's a float issue. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Got it. Great. So, what I'm going to do is, Shiva, I want to thank you enormously for this session. I think it's been of great value to everybody. I mean, we all learned a lot from your experiences of setting this up. Thank you so much. And what we will do is there are several questions that perhaps have not been answered entirely. We'll collect it and send it off to you. And if you can respond to it, we will then redirect them back to the folks who participated, in a sort of a FAQ like format.
No, absolutely, Sanjay. I think, yeah, it was a great discussion. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. And I think also congratulations on launching NICE. I think this is especially Arohana, so very timely initiative to support entrepreneurs in the craft sector. And yeah, congratulations to you and everybody in the team.
Thank you so much. All of this is a team effort, Shiva. I think it takes all of us to make this a success. Thank you so much. I look forward to being in touch.